So, let's talk about the architecture of control. And I don't mean the kind with force and coercion. I mean something much more subtle, the kind that works by quietly, almost invisibly, shaping our very sense of what's real.
This is a Crisis in Perception mini-explainer, and today we're going to use the story of The Matrix as a kind of jumping-off point. Now, we're not here to review the film, but to use it as a really powerful metaphor for understanding some very real-world systems of control.
So yeah, just to be super clear, this is not a plot summary. We're just using a story you probably know to introduce some pretty big ideas. Ideas about how our perception of the world is woven together by these powerful, often hidden narratives. And these are concepts we explore much more fully in our deep dive.
Which really brings us to the one big question that's going to drive this whole explainer. How do systems maintain control, not with guns or prisons, but by actually engineering the very definition of what we think is real, what we're told matters, and what's just considered normal?
Well, to even begin to answer that, we first need to get a handle on the foundational concept here. We need to understand the structure of perception itself.
Let's give it a name, a system of perception. So what is it? It's all the structures, media, cultural stories, economic models, that filter, shape, and even generate our understanding of the world. And they often do it so seamlessly that we don't even realize they're there.
And this brings us to an absolutely crucial point. Our focus here is on the structures, the impersonal, almost automatic processes and filters that shape what we believe. We are not looking for bad guys or villains to blame. This is about the architecture, not the individual actors inside it.
Okay, so how does this architecture of control actually work? Let's try to break it down into a few layers. And we'll start with the first and maybe the most visible one, what the media theorist Neil Postman called the filter of amusement.
Postman drew this really powerful distinction between two very different visions of control. On one hand, you have George Orwell's vision. It's all about pain, control through banning information. But then you have Aldous Huxley's vision, which is about control through pleasure, by flooding us with so much entertainment and distraction that we just lose the desire to even look for the truth. Postman argued that our world looks a lot more like Huxley's.
His core argument was basically this. When entertainment becomes the main way we communicate, everything else, politics, news, education, you name it, gets transformed into a kind of show business. It's not that serious issues are banned, it's that they're rendered trivial, just another piece of content to be consumed for amusement.
But it's not just about passive distraction. If we dig a little deeper into this architecture, we find a much more active layer. This is a framework designed not just to divert our attention, but to actually manufacture our consent. And if we look at the work of Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky, we can see how this works structurally. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a series of institutional filters. First, who owns the media sets the general agenda. Second, a heavy reliance on official, powerful sources decides what even counts as news. And finally, a very narrow group of approved experts gets to define the limits of acceptable debate, which pushes any real dissent right to the fringes.
So what you end up with isn't some kind of heavy-handed censorship. No, it's a much more elegant system that, just by its very design, naturally limits the range of what we think is possible. It basically sets the boundaries of the conversation before it can even get started.
This structure is incredibly effective at filtering reality. But what if we take it one step further? What happens when the reality being filtered isn't even the original one anymore? This brings us to our final and definitely most mind-bending layer, inspired by the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard.
Baudrillard asked this really fascinating question. What happens when our models of reality, our maps, our signs, our simulations, become more real than reality itself? What if the map doesn't just represent the territory, but actually starts to create it?
This is what he called the hyperreal. It's this weird state where the line between what's real and what's artificial just completely dissolves. In this space, reality isn't something we experience directly anymore. It's generated from all these circulating models and signs. We start mistaking the signs of the real for the real thing itself.
His famous book, Simulacra and Simulation, really dives deep into this idea. He argued that we've moved past a world where media just represents reality and into a world where it completely replaces it with a pure simulation. Baudrillard had this perfect example, Disneyland. He argued its whole purpose isn't just to be a fantasy world. No, it's presented as fake in order to make us believe that the world outside its gates, America itself, is real.
But his big claim was that the outside world has also become a simulation, and Disneyland is just the decoy that helps us hide that fact from ourselves.
Okay, so if we put these three layers together, the amusement, the consent, and the simulation, we can start to answer that deeper question. Why do people so often accept and even defend the very systems that confine their perception?
The really crucial insight here is that the system is incredibly self-reinforcing. Think about it. First, like Postman suggested, the simulation is entertaining, it's pleasurable, it feels normal. Then, as Herman and Chomsky showed, the framework of consent makes any truly different idea seem radical or just plain unserious. And finally, as Baudrillard argued, when you're living in the hyperreal, where do you go? There's no obvious outside to escape to anymore. The simulation has become the whole territory.
And this all leads to a final, pretty provocative thought. Simply showing someone the truth is often not enough to break the spell. And why is that? Because the system doesn't just hide the truth. It fundamentally redefines what truth, reality, and normal even mean. When the architecture of perception is itself the illusion, just pointing at a crack in the wall isn't going to bring it down.
This mini-explainer introduces ideas explored in greater depth in the full Crisis in Perception deep dive.
For a deeper systems-level analysis of this topic, see the full Crisis in Perception deep dive linked in the description.